Hello everyone. About some tips and tricks for executing a hand tool only inlay in this video. Enjoy. So this is the surface that I intend to do my hand cut inlay into. These are some previous examples of hand cut inlay. It is my goal to put something similar. This piece of maple is going to need to have some straight edges applied to it, and it's going to be applied somewhere in here. It should be noted that this surface is extremely smooth and has been nicely shellacked a few times, so there's a pretty nice coating of shellac on here. That's going to make my cut lines even easier to see. And as you may have guessed, the kicker with this process, the thing that really makes it advantageous and worth considering, is its ability to deal with straight edges really well. Now if there are curved edges, that is going to be greatly complicated, and you may want to consider just using a router or a Dremel or some other technique. But if there's at any point an inlay where you need a really straight edge, you are going to benefit from considering these options, and rather than attempt to run a router bit along this edge, you may as well just use something that's dead flat and true, like the back of a chisel. So things we're going to use in this video: a razor blade. Straight edges are going to be plenty easy to mark with just a regular old razor blade. I really enjoy these little tiny router planes, so this is what we're going to do most of our pocketing with. And we're going to use a chisel and a bench plane. So I'm going to choose to do what's called shooting this edge. That is, I'm going to take this hand plane and I'm just going to shoot some flat surfaces on here. It would be faster for sure if I drew some lines on here and rough cut it to shape with the jeweler's saw. But I relish any opportunity I get to use my hand plane, so I'm just going to knock flat edges on this, and I'm not real particular about the shape that it winds up being. If this were a piece of metal or a piece of pearl, recon stone, anything that was not behaving with a jeweler's saw, I would still shoot to put straight edges on it. I would intend to put straight edges on it in a similar fashion, but I would need to use a file or perhaps a block with sandpaper, and I would try to use my bird's mouth or something else in the vicinity to sort of refer to help me get some flat straight edges. And it is quite important to get really tight fits that your edges be really, really flat. So you got to do what you got to do to get those flat, and that will definitely be harder with metal, but always keep in mind that you want kind of something to refer to. It's going to be difficult if you're not taking advantage of some sort of reference surface. So this is set up to take a pretty heavy cut. Roughing it down took no time at all, probably 60 seconds or so. And you'll notice that I was always trying to exit the grain with the cut. That is, the grain is sort of flowing this way. If I were to run the plane this way, notice how the grain is sort of pointing up into the mouth. That's where I'm going to get nasty tear out and the plane is going to get stuck. So the fact that this plane is sitting on its own side means it's going to be square regardless of how I rotate this piece. So now I'm going to set up to get these edges to be really flat by taking a light cut, and at any point I can trust that the sole of my plane is real flat. And there's nothing like a hand plane for making a really straight edge, so that edge needs a tiny bit of work. Set up for a lighter cut and just true up all these edges so they're really nice. So there's a natural tendency anytime you're trying to make a flat edge sort of freehand to create sort of a convex shape, sort of a dome. And the beautiful thing about a hand plane that a file and a sanding block just can't replicate is you have the ability to fight against that natural tendency to be convex by intentionally trying to fight the plane to make a concave. Notice I'm starting in from the end, and I'm going to sort of make the cut exit before it gets to the other end. This is going to let me selectively focus on the middle. And there's a beautiful thing that happens is it will only let me make it so concave, so sunken, so hollow in the middle, to an amount that is approximately equal the amount of blade that's sticking out. So now that I can't take any more cuts in the middle, because I've taken sort of a blade height out of the middle, I should be able to just run one full pass, and that thing should just be screaming flat now. So I'll just go ahead and do that to all the edges. Little point to consider, I forgot about this until after I had already done it. I would do well to finish this end grain first, because I am somewhat inclined to get some tear out as I exit. So do the end grain first and then clean up these edges. You won't wind up with tear out there. So I got a little bit of blowout, so I just flipped back around and kind of finished off that side, removed that little chunk that flew off. And I could see this on the bottom of my hand plane, but I now am pretty confident that these edges are going to be super, super flat, thereby letting me sort of scribe around them and form the pocket for them to go into with the flat back of my chisel, and I should get really quickly and easily, I should just get a really tight fit. So these are looking good. Time to move on to mounting this into its sort of final location and scribing around it. So I can kind of put this wherever I want. I think I'm going to intend to tack it down right about here. I think it'll be interesting to do a pocket that goes across sort of the substrate and this previous inlay. That's always an option. If I intended a final component to be just incredibly fragile, more fragile than I could really handle, I could conceivably inlay it, get it, glued in and stable, and I could come in and put it in like so. You could imagine this piece of walnut would be pretty treacherous to deal with if I didn't sort of install it and have it supported and then do another inlay on top of it. So again, this surface has been pretty well shellacked. You can probably see the shine there a little bit. Several coats, it is pretty well protected. As such, the amount of glue you're about to see me use is way, way, way more than would be okay if this was raw wood. The shellac is going to defeat this glue joint to a large extent. So I'm going to not be too shy with the glue. I am using the bottle. That's usually kind of against the rules, but since that surface is so well shellacked, I think that will probably do it. I'm not going to be pushing on this very hard. It's going to be easy to mark around it because it is flat edged. I hope that comes through pretty well. That much glue, if both of these were raw wood, is going to be treacherous to get off. So I'm going to set this right about there. And I'm just going to hold this down with my finger for a moment. I just thought it would be kind of interesting and perhaps challenging to see if I can avoid breaking off that very small section of pocket there. So this has been drying for a minute now, and I think I'm about ready to go for it. I am going to sort of support that glue when I do come in to use the knife, and again I'm just going to use a box cutter, a utility blade, and I do need to keep in mind that this is a double bevel, so I'll be sort of putting my head in line with this where I can see it, really kind of trying to guess where that line is, and I'll just be carefully knifing all the way around this, making sure that my knife mark doesn't wander away from the part, and also making sure that I don't cut off the underside of this part here, or I'll be marking a line that's too small and I'll be fighting with it later. So I've knifed all the way around this. It'll be more clear once I pop this off, but I did get a little bit overzealous and I overcut in the corners a little bit. Hopefully that kind of comes out in the leveling process. So I'm going to get after the end grain, and again I'm going to try to knock this off as horizontally as possible. It is pretty important when you're trying to make glue fail without taking any wood with it that you avoid this sort of motion. That peeling motion is where the wood is going to lose in the fight against the glue. You want to kind of try to shear it off. That's the best way to make the glue fail and leave everything where it is. And anywhere else that I would hit it would either be something pointy or it would be sort of long grain. So I feel like this nice flat edge along this nice flat edge striking it horizontally is going to be a good way to go. So I'm just going to keep that piece from flying away. Popped right off. Got some good clean lines. I can see them really easily, and this is going to get even better once I rub some charcoal in here. You can see I overcut a little bit there and there. I'm not going to do anything with it now, but that might be the last areas to clean up and get really sharp and clean when I go to level this whole surface. So watch out for that. So I'm about to take some Artist's Graphite, just really fine black powder. If I had a chalk color other than bright green, I would use that. But any fine powder that is going to contrast with the surface that you're working on is going to be handy. So I'm just dipping my finger into this this charcoal powder and just kind of rubbing it in there. It's kind of a mess now. Maybe this charcoal powder was a poor choice. However, I think when I come in to scrape it off, it's all going to kind of come into focus, because all this errant stuff out here should have nowhere to hide. Once I scrape kind of the top layer of shellac off, I think it'll be pretty well hidden just down in my cut lines and only there. Standard razor blade. I hope that's coming through on camera. It's still a little messy, but those are dead clear. You couldn't ask for a better cut line than that, so I'll take it. So the temptation here is going to be pretty strong to come in and set your chisel right in that line. I mean, ultimately that line is the finish line, right? So why don't we start there? If you do that while there's still waste material in here, this chisel will smush over that line. That is, when you set the back of the chisel right in that line, you have to think the chisel is not going to travel straight this way. If there's material on the bevel side, the bevel being towards the waist, it will make the chisel drift off towards the back, and it will crush this line over and make the whole pocket too big. So what I'm going to do is set my chisel maybe a 1/16 or so to start in from the edge, and I'm just going to sort of hammer a border. I've got myself a little bit of a border here. You can see I stayed, 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch away from all my finish lines. And it probably doesn't come through on camera, but I can see like this area even tried to start picking up to my cut line. That just lets you know that chisels, if they have solid material on both sides, they have a tendency to drift towards the back, even if you're hammering them straight along their length. So you do not want to be starting at that cut line. That will be the last little thing that we do. Now that I've got this sort of safety edge around, I want to sort of break up the integrity of this material so that it's easier to get out with the little router plane. These things are great, and this one happens to be nice and sharp. However, I'm cutting to a 1/16 of an inch deep, and that's a pretty big cut for this little tiny iron to deal with, so I want to sort of compromise the integrity of this material in here, and I'm going to choose to do that by just cutting perpendicular to the grain. I'm just going to sort of wreck the long grain strength in here, and what that's going to do is make these nice convenient little nuggets that are ready to just sort of pop out and give up as soon as this thing comes in and touches them. So I will avoid this tool getting stuck and big chips riding up on this blade and just kind of trying to tear out or get unpleasant, just by sort of wrecking the strength of this piece by attacking the long grain. I should note that I don't know how deep I'm hammering this chisel at this point. I'm trying to hammer it. This piece is approximately 50 thousandths thick. I'm trying to hammer it this deep, or perhaps a whisper deeper. Ultimately, if I go too deep, all I'm doing is putting marks on the floor of the pocket. I'm well underneath the part, so ultimately I don't care if there are little chisel marks in the floor of the pocket. I only care about the periphery being really clean. So I'm going to come in and imagine hammering that deep, 50 thousandths or so, and I'm just going to wreck all this long grain so this guy can plow it out. So this stuff is kind of ready to give up the ghost. I just need to kind of plow it out of there with this, but I should have no trouble because it's already all broken up. So to set the depth of this thing is really a piece of cake. This is the material that's going in there, and I would like in the end for this piece to be sticking up just a whisper, perhaps be perfectly flush. And what that means is I'm just going to put the sole of this router plane on that material. I know that this is flat out here because I planed it earlier, so I'm just going to hold this firmly against the sole, and then what I'm observing, I'm going to drop that blade until it just starts scratching this surface down here. That lets me know that my blade is sticking out by exactly this thickness. That will make that pocket exactly the right depth to receive this piece. So while this guy rides on my part to be installed, it is just scraping the high points of the shellac off of the surface below, so I'm happy with that depth. I'm going to do the best I can to plow this out and get it on camera, but this is a little bit constrained here, so you can see how these little pieces just sort of pop out, and this is a very efficient way of removing material. I've mentioned previously that making dust is never the answer if there's any way for you to be making chips, and these are gigantic chips. These are really nice big chunks. So this is going to go pretty quickly. So I'm pretty happy with how this is going. As you can see, these big pieces are kind of just ready to fly away as soon as you let them know how deep you'd like them to break out at. I'm running into a little bit of an issue over here. I wonder if I've just got a big strong glue pocket underneath this previous inlay. So rather than get aggressive with the router plane and risk having something weird happen over here, I just need to kind of reinforce that little safety line around this edge. And everywhere else is looking pretty good. You can see I do have some slight chisel marks in the floor of the pocket. I'm not sweating that at all. It made it 10 times faster to just be knocking this material out of here real quick and easy. So I'm going to come around with a chisel, and if I did have an 1/8 inch before, I'm going to sort of cut that in half. I'm going to come around and sort of cut away half of my safety margin. A little bit of extra attention over here. We've got something tough going on underneath this inlay. And then with the same setting on the router plane, I'm going to come back in and sort of break that new safety line, break out up to that new safety line. And it's just going to be sort of a progression of scoot ever closer to your finish line, come out and remove that material with the router plane, scoot a little closer, remove that material, and then we'll see what it looks like when I'm kind of down to hitting the finish line itself. So I'm getting pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and come in and sort of split this safety buffer one more time before I go for the gold and put my chisel in that line there. And as I get closer and closer, and particularly on the last cut, I'm going to try to select the biggest chisel that will possibly fit on each section. So that chisel's a little bit too big to go here, but I'm going to grab a bigger chisel before I go to do this section. The fewer cuts I can make, the flatter it's going to be. So if I have like an 1.5 inch chisel that can pretty much span this whole distance, that's going to make for a really, really flat edge. Something I want to point out, and it's not a problem and it's not necessarily a good thing either. These little pieces here have broken up to the cut line. This lets me know that I was probably going a little bit overzealous when I made that cut line. It's mighty deep. It's deeper than it needs to be. I don't need to have established the edge there like that with the razor blade. So if I had this to do over again, I would have watched the overcutting on the corners there, and I probably wouldn't have bothered cutting so deep. So I'm ready to kind of go for it here. As you can see, the material remaining is very, very small. I'm at the point where I'm comfortable with it being possible to put the back of my chisel towards the outside of the pocket, set my chisel directly in the knife line, hold the chisel as vertical as possible, and when I get to this point, I should not be hammering. So this is a philosophy I will observe anytime I'm cutting up to a cut line, whether that's doing an inlay pocket or cutting the shoulder on a tenon or cutting a mortise. When you get to this point where you're about to establish the show line, this is really the one cut that matters. If you need to use a chisel or if you need to use a mallet, that means that there is still too much waste in here, and it is gonna smush your line out past where you wanted it. So at this point, I should be able to take a sharp chisel, the biggest one that will fit on each one of these flats, and I should be able to just hold it vertical and lean on it, and this waste should have somewhere to go, kind of move into the pocket. That's the only thing that's going to allow this chisel to go straight into the pocket and keep my line where I expected it, is if this waste is small enough that it will move out of the way. If I lean on this and it doesn't go, I won't hit it with the mallet. I'll scoot the chisel out of the line, take a little bit more of the waste off by striking it with the mallet, then I'll come back in and lean on it. That's a pretty important thing, I think. The finish line should not be struck with a mallet. You should lean on it and the chisel should just sort of fall in. So all those cuts you just saw, those were right into the knife marks, and no mallet was used. Just kind of leaned my shoulder into it a little bit, pushed down, and if I feel the chisel get stuck before I feel like it goes deep enough, again, I will scoot into the waist, give it a whack with the mallet, and then come in and just press it to see if I can get it to fall down the finish line like I want it. So now I come back in with the shoulder plane, and you can see these little pieces they know just what to do. They're getting out of there. It's important to note that many bench chisels have a flat edge. That is, this is a 90-degree corner from the flat to this bevel here. If you have an angle that's quite acute, you want to really watch out for putting a chisel in there, because if this chisel goes all the way to the corner, when this flat in here comes in, it will smush a little divot into that corner that wasn't supposed to be there. That is, it will smash a 90-degree corner whether you had a 90-degree corner there or not. So you might need to stop short and finish that off with the tip of a razor blade or something. I'm in the home stretch now. I'm done chiseling. I'm done using the router plane. It's pretty important that I get these last few little fibers hanging on out from that corner. Any of those that are allowed to remain will try to keep this piece, the part that's going to go in here, from sitting properly on the floor of the pocket. So I'm just coming in with the tip of the razor blade and just giving it a quick once over. 99% of the work is already done, but these little chunks need to go, or they can affect the way the part will go in. So the pocket's done. I'm pretty happy with how that all came out. Again, these little chisel marks and things don't matter because they're on the floor, they're about to get covered up. The periphery is put pretty clean. I think everything's going to be pretty nice. Like I said earlier, those places where I overcut with the knife, there and there, those are going to be the last places to clean up if they do. To be honest with you, I don't love the artist graphite for this purpose. It's so fine that it kind of is making a mess of things. It's not really going away when I want it to. I probably will just go with some ebony sawdust or something next time. Maybe I'll get a darker piece of chalk. I will point out that I broke my own cardinal rule, and I failed to give myself a witness mark. I got away with it again in this instance because this piece is pretty straightforward, but it can be super frustrating if you forget to do that. So it's a good practice when you tack your piece down, knife around it, give yourself a witness mark, and that will save you some messing around. I'm about to draw on a whiteboard one final little trick that I'm going to do just to give myself a little bit better chance of success here. This is very close. I'm not going to shove it in because I do want to put wood glue underneath it. It's close. I could almost certainly shove it in as is, but I'm going to do one more trick that is going to increase my chances of having a really tight fit. Like these, I was real happy with how these went down, and I want to give myself every opportunity to get that kind of result here. So this is a basic sketch of what we've got going on here. This is the substrate. We just chopped our pocket in with the hand tools here. This is our part to go in. It's important to realize that when we made that knife mark right on the edge of our piece here, we made a very slight bevel, just the bevel of our knife. Whenever you have the option, you always put the bevel of your tool towards the waist. We did not have that option here. We could only mark it from the outside, so there will be a tiny bit of gap there. Hopefully it wasn't big and we can level that off after the fact and it won't be a big deal. So this is going to be a really tight fit, and something we can do to encourage things to go well here. You really want to watch out for this if you're inlaying metal into wood. Metal is much tougher than wood. Obviously, it's very crisp. It does not give or compress very much at all. And this corner here can be very inclined. If you get this thing cocked sideways and you throw a clamp on it, this corner can be inclined to kind of grab onto something here and smash it down into the pocket, and it will prevent the part from going down all the way. You'll get nasty torn grain here that will be visible at the end, and it's a big bummer. Less of a concern with wood, but we still want to kind of minimize chances of these corners trying to grab the substrate and smush stuff down into the bottom of the pocket. We already took care with the razor blade to clean these corners out. We made sure that there was no chunks left in there. So to encourage this thing to go in nicely, but without affecting its final fit, we really want this fit to be airtight. We're just going to put little chamfers on the bottom. And I do mean little. This is a helpful thing to do, but you don't want to get greedy with it. If your fit is not good, adding a gigantic chamfer is not going to improve anything for you. And in fact, you know, we need to level enough to get these the bevel marks from the knife out. You can easily level to the point where you start showing off your little trick with the bevel, and it will appear as a gap. And the more you level, the bigger that gap will appear. So this is about 50 thousandths thick. That's a light 16th. I'm looking to make this like literally a quarter of that. Maybe 10 or 15 thousandths will be the height of this. I would never do a bevel that exceeded like the halfway point of the material. That's just too much. If your piece still feels too tight, like it's not going to go in well, you need to actually kind of address the fit right here in a vertical, perpendicular sort of way. But particularly on metal and pearl, material that is not going to give if it gets caught up on a little bit of fragile fuzz right here, putting a little bit of a chamfer there can be a great way to avoid that. I could do this with the hand plane, just by picking my piece up at an angle and shooting it off in a similar fashion. I could do it with a file. I could do it with sandpaper. I think in this case, I'm going to opt to just do it with a big old file, and it's just going to be like one swipe to just barely break that corner to encourage it to seat properly. So I've got my piece on my bird's mouth here. My witness mark is letting me know that this side goes up, so I want to put the chamfer on the opposite side. I'm going to opt, since we're doing a funny angle here, this is perpendicular. This is perpendicular to the bird's mouth. I'm going to hold it at 45-degree angle or so, and then I'm going to come in with the fine side of a mill file. You could do this with a sanding block. You could do it with a needle file. I just like this because it's wide and this is a wide surface. And I'm just going to give this a real quick once over. Again, I do not want to see that bevel even approach the midpoint of this thickness here. Don't get greedy, or you may see that later. So that's real small. Got to be real gentle here. This is kind of a short grain situation. I'm really just barely breaking that corner. And there it is. Bevel on all of the bottom sides, so this is going to be inclined to kind of go in without too much fuss and without threatening to grab some of the substrate and drag it down in and make a torn area. So we're ready to glue this in. I forgot to even be worried about this little area here. I thought that was going to maybe be a risk of breaking out. I think just by kind of following my own rules and sneaking up on this line, I didn't break this little piece out, but you got to watch out for little areas like that. So we are ready to glue this piece in. I've got a little piece of fancy non-stick plastic here. Really any trash bag or painter's plastic or Ziploc bag would do just fine. I've got a clamping caul and I have a clamp at the ready. So I've just got some wood glue here. I'm going to be pretty generous. I'm going to fill up the whole pocket, and most importantly, I'm going to push it up on the walls. I want to get that glue everywhere, and then I'm going to shove this piece in there. Totally covered there. Time is kind of the essence. Got a little bit too tight on me because I sort of put one corner in first. I need to kind of make it go down in parallel, if you will. But I do kind of need to hurry because everything is getting tighter as I fiddle around with this. So it's very tight, but I can feel that I have all the edges started. Shiny side down on my fancy plastic. Clamping caul. Trying to hurry up and get this done, otherwise I would not be using this piece of wood as a clamping caul. So just clamping that down firmly. I'm seeing some squeeze out happen, that's a good sign. So it's been clamped for 60 seconds probably. I'm convinced that it's gone down as far as it's going to go, and most of the squeeze out that's going to happen has already happened. So we got quite a bit of squeeze out there. I'm going to come in with a damp rag. And I'm not shy about getting everything nice and wet. That's just going to make everything swell up even further. Sticking up a little bit over here. I can always come in with sort of, the butt of a chisel or something flat and just give that area a little bit of help. See, I got a little bit more squeeze out in shoving that area down. Reasonably happy with that. At this point it looks like it's done, but I'm going to put the clamp back on it. I don't want this piece to keep swelling and buckle up or do anything crazy like that. And I'm just going to sort of switch to a fresh area on my plastic. So here it is. I let it dry under a clamp for 30 minutes and then took the clamp off and gave it probably another 30 minutes. Pretty happy with how it went. The graphite is still pretty apparent. It makes it look like it's somewhat gappy. I'm real happy with how flat it is. It's definitely within a few thousandths of being flat. That's going to make leveling it go a lot faster. But I got to level the bevel mark and the graphite out, and we'll see if I can get rid of these little knife marks here. I would probably do well to let this dry overnight just to be sure that it's super dry. It's definitely not going to come out of there, but damp wood doesn't tend to respond very well to a hand plane, so I'm going to get a little greedy here. I want to see how it turned out, and I'm just going to take a few swipes with a hand plane and just see how much of this border discoloration goes away. Getting there. I'm going to go fast mode, but you'll notice the grain is perpendicular here. This plane is really sharp, but this is kind of a recipe for an issue. So I'm sort of biasing the plane at a diagonal while I run it this way. And what that does is it sort of cheats this wood into feeling like it's being cut along its grade. And since the blade is angled this way, it also sort of makes this piece feel like it's being cut along its grain. And I'm getting kind of a slicing motion going on. It's cleaning up pretty well. This border is going away slowly but surely. The hand planing is working with that sort of diagonal shearing cut. I'm not getting any tear out. The surface is really nice. I'm noticing a low spot. This is the last spot to clean up, and I'm thinking back through the process, and I'm wondering if all the chisel striking that happened around the edge, that area got a little bit deep. It was probably not smart of me to use my sort of rounded chisel handle to push that side down. I think I even shoved that side a little deeper than it ought to have gone. I would have benefited from laying something flat on it, maybe striking it with a mallet, or you know, shoving down with something flat that would have resisted shoving that little piece too deep. But I'm going to carry on with the hand plane. We'll see how clean this gets. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. There's still the faintest little bit of those overzealous knife marks here. I can still see a little bit of that graphite, and note to self, graphite is just too insidious. It's too fine. I probably should have just used some dark colored sawdust, or chalk would have been fine. That graphite is really, really preposterously fine. I'm pretty happy with it. That was probably, I could probably bang out another one of this level of quality in 10 to 15 minutes, I think, with no recording or talking. So yeah, I mean, I think that probably comes through in the video. The fit is much better than I would get in a rush if it was a jeweler saw on a Dremel cut pocket. Those straight edges are really advantageous. And I'll just say one more time, this may seem, you know, like it's not going to be useful, because how often are you doing straight lines and inlays? Even if the whole inlay is curved and you have one little straight section, you would do well to Dremel near that line and then come and just chop the finish line with a chisel. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'll show you, just because it happens to the best of us. This inlay was kind of demonstration number 1, and then it got leveled. This inlay got done, that was a demo, it got leveled, or I'm sorry, this one happened, then this one happened. So this is what happens when an inlay kind of ceases to exist. Over leveled it. This it makes sense that this happened with how many times this surface has been leveled for all these demonstrations, but this can happen when you least expect it, and as you can see, it's pretty unsightly. It would be very, very difficult to repair that surface. A little bit of this is tear out. I set up to take a heavier cut with the hand plane, trying to get this done faster, and got into the tear out region of this walnut. But that can happen, and if you're not careful about your depths, or you know, working with materials that are kind of similar thicknesses, and you don't plan that out, this is what you don't want to see. And I heard this happening, and it happened to a small extent at first, but once it starts, there's really no fixing it, and the more you level it, the more it happens. So you want to kind of do your homework and plan to leave yourself as much thickness here vertically as you possibly can, just to give yourself as much room to clean up as is possible. I'm going to hit this surface with some shellac and just see how it looks. It's not bad. The fit is good. I would not use that graphite again. I'm seeing some definite black lines that are there more than an error in cutting. I think there's still a little bit of that graphite hanging out in there, making things artistic. But yeah, that's how you do an inlay with no power tools at all, just edge tools.